to the final meeting of the Senior Fraud Task Force. It is bittersweet, as it feels like we have just gotten started, and it also feels like we've been working together for quite a while. I would like to take this time to thank each of you for your contributions, for joining our team, and for helping us today with our work product. I would especially like to recognize our co-chair, Joan Wilson, who has done yeoman's work both publicly and behind the scenes to make this a very successful task force. Her work on this draft report has been particularly meaningful, and I am grateful for all of her contributions. Today will be a working session, and we will be doing our best to go through the report together to be sure that everyone feels heard and to make sure that we have the desired updates that people would like to make. I would like to also express another big thank you to Cameron, who will be sharing the screen today and helping us to make any changes to the document. I know that the leadership at the Aging and Human Services Committees are looking forward to our report. I apologize for how quickly time has caught up to us, but I am very confident that our report will be warmly received by the legislature as we endeavor to submit our report before the start of the session next week. And so now I'm going to kick it over to Joan for any opening comments that she may have.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. That was very nice of you. This has definitely been a joint effort. Michael and I worked on this together over the last week or so, and I also want to thank Laura. She and I had a really great meeting last week to kind of go into details about some of the things that are included in the report. And Marie and Michelle also contributed some information via email. So I'm happy with where we've come in this short time, and I'm looking forward to finalizing this. So that's all for me for today. We can get started on looking at the report and going through it and getting the comments. And it's obviously not in finished form. There's some areas that need to be completed, but we can start reviewing it and hearing what people have to add or comments.
Thank you. Yeah, and before we start reading through all of this, I just want to quickly open it up to the floor for any initial reflections by any of our members. And we want to make sure that everyone is heard and that we are, all having all of the contributions put in here forward, especially as this is going to be our team effort here. Does anyone have any reflections that they would like to share, whether about the task force in general or their feelings about this report or anything? Matt Barrett.
Thank you so much, Michael. And sorry I didn't raise my hand formally. I was scurrying out to find where the hand was. But thank you for recognizing me. I just wanted to comment and that one, I'm grateful that we're going to be doing a walkthrough of the report that we just received late yesterday, this morning. But I would note that it's a thick document, and understanding, and this was reinforced by Joan, it's not in its final format. That I would suggest we haven't given members of the task force ample time to thoroughly review it. And so situationally, I'm happy to, that we're going to be walking through it, and I'll comment as appropriate throughout, as it sounds like you're going to give us the opportunity to do so. But I would suggest that that additional time be provided to submit additional comments, and perhaps even have another meeting, if that's permitted, where we can go through the final document. And those are just my sort of preliminary reaction. And maybe it's me alone. We are in the middle of a public health emergency. There are a full range of issues going on concerning the people that are of our care and concern here. And while this is a very important task force report, I hope it will get the final attention that it deserves, rather than sort of, if you won't mind me saying, kind of rushing it through at the end without an ample opportunity to comment, see a final draft, and then perhaps even vote on a final draft, or have particular members be able to voice their objections and have that noted in the final report that they're in disagreement of certain provisions. But anyway, thank you for the opportunity to give that opening comment.
Well, thank you, Matt. And surely we understand that there's a bit of a time crunch. I think ultimately we've determined is most important of all is to get this submitted before the start of session formally. So what my hope is that, and I'm glad that you're here today, Matt, is that we can go through this, and, if there is something, for example, that you find objectionable, that, we can talk about it and maybe work our way through it. I'm not sure if we'll be allowed to have another formal meeting like this. Maybe if there's some other thing we can do, or take a vote by email. I'm not sure. We might have to do some sort of follow-up afterward, but my hope is that we can charge through as much of this as possible today. It's not necessarily ideal, but yet I think that we have a lot of really great content here, and I think that my hope is that we can do the best we can, and then maybe we can revisit your concerns at the end of the meeting and see where we are. Steve, I saw your hand before too. Steve Rubin, if you'd like to say something.
I was just gonna say, I appreciate the time and energy and effort it went into typing all of this up. I'm sure it wasn't easy. And I'm glad I didn't have to write it all. So I appreciate that. And I look forward to going through it, and definitely made my list of suggestions since we got it. Cameron was kind enough to send it early yesterday, so we had enough time to kind of go through it. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Matthew.
Hi, yes. Along the lines of processes, I guess, for today and ongoing. So, I've been making some suggested edits to the draft, and was wondering what the format might be to either provide those back through Cameron, or how those could be incorporated, aside from what we talk about today, just the more drafting and edits for the potential document.
So maybe it's helpful to, if you have a completed draft with whatever those changes are, if you want to maybe email them to Cameron, and then maybe there's a way you can copy and paste them in, or are they lengthy, or can we verbally add them in? What do you think, Matthew?
No, they're lengthy.
All right, let's turn this
Perhaps
into a 4-hour meeting. Let's do this. No, but I'm glad that you've done that. I think maybe emailing them in might be the way to do it to Cameron.
Can you save it as a different title with your initials? Usually when I'm making changes to a document, I'll save it as a different document and include in the title revisions by JRW. So if you can say revision, include that it's your revisions, and then Cameron hopefully can compile all the different changes we can compare, so we can see what the changes are.
Okay, great.
So, Joan, should we take turns, or how would you like to proceed, or would you like to lead us through?
And we can take turns. If you want to go ahead and start.
Okay. So, shall we? All right. So we can just read this out loud, or does anyone have any? I'm trying to figure out, like, as far as time goes, we can literally read this thing out loud, or as we have each page, if there's something that sticks out to people that's like, oh, I had this thing, a comment on page 3 on the second line.
Maybe we can go section by section. We can just each read through it silently and then anybody who has a comment on each section.
All right, so
I don't know if
this-
everybody has it printed out or if you're only looking at it on the screen.
So does anyone have anything, any comments on this first paragraph, task force work plans starting due to the open nature?
I do. It's Jackie. It looks like that there's some, the opening of the parentheses is missing, and it looks like there's an extra dash in there. I think that it's the middle of that first paragraph, where it says issues related issues of fraud that impact some of Connecticut's most vulnerable residents, those who are in need of long-term care assistance, close parens, but there's no place where the parentheses opens up. So I'm not really sure what that thought is.
I think originally it was 2 commas and then I meant to change it into parentheses and I didn't put the first one. So I was going to put those who are in need of long-term care assistance in parentheses rather than separate it by commas.
Okay.
So I just have to be consistent with that.
And so what is that dash after the word impact? Is that part of?
I think that was a change on my printout. It's red, so it just needs to be an accepted change. I think there was a comma there or something.
The other thing I would say is, since we refer to ourselves as task force quite a lot through the document, I would always uppercase task force, because that way it's always clear that we're talking about the recommendations of our task force.
Okay,
I'm
thank
okay
you.
with that. Thank you. Any other comments on this first paragraph?
I just want to state that that I don't have a specific recommendation, but as I'm reading through it, it sounds like I'll have the opportunity to submit a written comment. And in terms of the sort of preamble or upfront section, I wouldn't anticipate making any major changes, except for that I feel like just a quick review sort of undervalues, or it doesn't really come out concerning the statement of the problem and the huge consequences and harm associated with what previously had been characterized as huge delays and harm to families, the applicants themselves, the state of Connecticut, and providers downstream, because of these huge delays. And then going along those lines, I think we had pretty good evidence or observations from the organization that I offered to, have appear before the this task force in terms of the value that they bring to expediting the application process. Now, that isn't to say that we didn't hear other things, but we did hear those things, and they are not present in the preamble on it. And so for your consideration, I'll probably make some editorial suggestions and additional language to frame the issue up in that regard.
No, I don't necessarily agree that our task force was meant to look at delays. I think we had talked about it a couple of times during our meetings, but I don't think that was what we were meant to be looking at.
It's really, I wouldn't be a focus on the delays. It would be a statement of fact that, and maybe an explanation as to why this marketplace perhaps has been interrupted by Medicaid planning agencies. And I think it was in response to the, in part, the huge delays in processing these applications. I believe even the attorney from from New Jersey acknowledged that. And so it's really, it was, listen, I don't want to overplay this. It's not going to blow up your report. It's just something that helps frame up the issue in the beginning. And all I can ask is, I'll send it in for your consideration, and I hope you'll include it in the final report.
I think Matt, that would be helpful if you have some substitute language or some additional language where we can actually see it, then that would be helpful for us. Anna.
Just a general comment at kind of beginning on this page, but throughout, if there's a way to clarify that we're talking about Medicaid LTSS and we're not, I mean, I think it's kind of obvious to the participants of this work group, but for folks who might be encountering this document, you know, in other ways, I think if we can just be very clear up front that throughout the document, when we talk about the Medicaid application process, we're talking about LTSS and we're not talking about Husky or anything like that.
Thank you. Good point.
From my end, on the preamble, kind of minor, just thought that I suggested replacing the word bolster in the last bullet to augment and strengthen the protective services. There should be an S after service, and then add the word program, capitalized P, after elderly.
Okay, I like that.
Again, but I'll send in with because I have just a lot of stylistic or, you know, editing points that I don't want to necessarily take up here.
Anna?
I think Jackie had her hand up first.
That's okay, Anna. You go, and I'll
I can't
follow.
see your hand, Jackie. It's in your window. Sorry, I didn't see it.
So just very quickly, something that I know came up as a point of conversation, and maybe this could be clarified through a footnote. But when we talk about senior throughout, are we talking about 60 or older, 65 or older? So if there's a way to possibly footnote, you know, for PSE, we're talking about 60 plus. If there are other areas where we might be talking 65 plus, just for, again, for a little bit of additional clarification.
Yeah, I was going to add something in there about what we had agreed to, because I think at our initial meeting, we had talked about the age, and I just couldn't remember which age we ended up. I think it was 60 plus. So we can add that in there as far as an explanation of, you know, our initial discussion of, you know, what exactly we were looking at.
Okay, thank you.
Jackie?
One of the comments that I was looking for, maybe to be stated a little stronger, is the fact that we talked about protecting senior citizens from fraud. We don't want it to just assume that it means that the fraud has already happened and we're looking for ways to mitigate it, but that we are also concerned about protecting senior citizens from fraud before it happens. And I don't know where the appropriate place to put that would be, so that, because of the training we talk about, the advanced warning, these will all be things that fall in the category of, we don't want it to happen. Yes, we want to help it after it happens and mitigate that, but do we need to put a statement somewhere that we're also hoping to prevent it rather than protect it from happening after it's happened? Does that
Should
make
we-
sense?
Yeah, should we make that a bullet point? I feel like that was a theme. We could say prevention of harm to seniors through exploring topics. I don't know. What do other members think? Prevention.
Unless it's included right in the very top where it says studying ways, right under the overview, or I should say part of the overview, studying ways to protect senior citizens from fraud or prevent senior citizens from fraud, as well as protecting. I don't know, maybe it's right up front where we address it, so that we know it's before and after. Studying ways to we could say it very simply, protect senior citizens from fraud before and once exposed, or before and once, I don't know. It just seems to me that we don't want to leave it as an afterthought.
Laura just put in the comments prevention and response. So maybe protect senior citizens from fraud through prevention and response, or something like that.
Yeah. All right, let's go down to the executive summary. I like intervention too.
Intervention's a good way of phrasing it.
Thank you. Any comments on those first two paragraphs? I think they look good. Anna?
And again, I'm sorry for the wood chipper noise in the background. I think the last sentence of the second paragraph, our research concluded 3 areas where the state can improve the system. I might add in, I might say identified instead of concluded, and note that it's 3 key areas, because we do have at the very bottom a pretty substantial list of additional recommendations. But I think, it's good here that we mention that these are areas where the state can make improvements. And I would just say in the writing of those 3 key recommendations themselves, we emphasize the state's role in making this change, because we talk about the need of the state to improve the system, but the recommendations themselves aren't phrased in a way that gives that discusses the state's role.
Does that look better now? Our research identified 3 key areas. All right, Matthew.
Along similar lines, so in the third line, where it indicates that older adults often feel shame and concern, and I changed it to in reporting fraud, I would recommend adding or financial exploitation after fraud. And in the same sentence that Anna pointed out, kind of along the same lines, I had added the clause as detailed more fully below, comma, our research identified 3 key areas where the state can improve the system. And I had thought about changing and provide, instead of safety net protections to our senior residents, because we're really looking at fraud and financial exploitation as opposed to general social services programs. So that's where I was thinking it would be not a safety net, but protections for our senior residents.
Thank you.
Just a suggestion as we're going, perhaps as Cameron's making the changes, he should do it with like review or track changes on so we can actually see it in real time on the screen. Might make it easier to see as they go.
All right.
And I think if Cameron, if you can also, save this as a different version, then we can have a version that shows the changes, when we're done.
When we're done. Jackie has a recommendation, eliminate word 2 after reach out in second. Matthew, just remind me, I think earlier you said you didn't like the phraseology concern when it comes to reporting fraud. You said, how did you phrase that?
I think you could just replace the word in, when it comes to can be replaced to within, I think is what he suggested.
Okay.
Yeah, right before the word reporting says when it comes to, I think he suggested that could be changed to the word in instead of when it comes to.
Oh, yes, that's correct.
So you can take out when it comes to, when it comes also. Yeah. It's still not tracking the changes.
It's tracking changes on my screen with the red line on the side.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
It was covered by my chat box.
That's fine. All right. Next line.
So we can, Laura's suggesting replacing senior with older adult, so we could do a search and replace of that. Well, except for where it says senior fraud, because that's the name of our task force. We probably can't change that.
Maybe we can make note of that and
Yeah,
just
we
try to
could do
go
that
through it
later.
piecemeal. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's important just because there's been a really big shift in, ageist sort of terms, and senior is definitely a term that points in the direction of ageism. And so we want to, at least from my perspective, in developing a policy, we want it to be a policy that everyone can relate to, and why it's important to everyone to have, this protection in place. It's not for old people, it's for everyone, because we're all going to get there at some point. So God willing. So, I think it's important from a policy perspective, so our legislators, young and old, can identify with this and why it's important.
Yeah, great point. We can definitely do a search and replace after we're done going through this.
Anna?
To piggyback off of Laura's comments a bit, I think it might be helpful to look to, and I started doing this in my draft, to look at places where instead of just referring to older adults, we also include people with disabilities. I know our purview is, specifically older adults, but there are some areas in here when we're talking about the Medicaid applications, for example, where it has an impact beyond just older adults. There are a lot of folks that receive services in nursing homes and in community settings. So if there are areas to be more inclusive there, I think it's at least worth looking and articulating where we can, that this has a broader impact.
I would be okay with that. And right where it has the word senior at the right where your cursor was at the top corner, maybe to the detriment of older adults and people with disabilities.
Yeah, because it's not the case that every older adult needs services, and it's not the case that everyone receiving these services is an older adult. So where we can, I'd like to reflect that in the language. But I do understand that that's tricky because of
I think we can pepper it in
our
throughout.
mission here. Yeah, thank you.
Matthew.
Oh, sorry. So I might have a little bit of a counter to that suggestion in that, maybe a footnote might be a more appropriate point, that a number of the recommendations might be applicable to other potentially vulnerable populations. My only thing is that really the task force didn't hear a lot of testimony related. We heard testimony related to the long-term care, Medicaid application with respect to long-term care and senior planning and support. We've heard from protective services, from the elderly, banking, the ombudsman, but really it was focused towards what might be statutorily an elder population. So I just would be a little bit, not having heard the potential vulnerabilities that those with disabilities may have unique to with respect to financial exploitation or fraud. I guess I just would be a little bit hesitant to just wrap it. I'm not disagreeing with the concept, of course, but just with respect to this report and the testimony that we received, it might be a little bit beyond our scope.
Yeah, and I think it's a way to handle that and to not cause Michael and Joan too much additional agita here. I think that could be an okay way to handle it. I think it would be appropriate to just acknowledge, even as you said, just in a footnote.
Yeah, I definitely want to acknowledge people with disabilities, just because they apply for Medicaid. They get defrauded too. And I just want to be inclusive of that, whether it's a footnote or put throughout. I do believe they could also be exploited too, through family members, through caretakers, through others. I don't think that's too big a stretch. But I want to be kind of thoughtful and inclusive of everyone, but I definitely don't want to leave behind, completely disabled populations, especially since, the whole purpose has to do originally, not limited to, but, the Medicaid application process, and these are folks who are also recipients. And it kind of goes along too with one of our main recommendations with the expanded ombudsman to who would be eligible for those services. That population would be eligible for those services too. Thank you. Matt Barrett.
Yeah, hey, thanks so much. I think this is in support of Anna's comment, and I don't have specific language yet. And again, reserve my right to send something in. But we did. There was considerable focus on applications that begin when a person, and I think it's without regard to whether or not they are older Americans or disabled, and the application process beginning when they're in the nursing facility. But it was also acknowledged that so many of these applications actually are begun and born long before that, while people are living in the community, and the some of the advisories in here, I mean, eventually probably ought to apply and be applicable to community-based long-term care services and supports, that are not triggered or begun, upon a nursing home admission. And if that was part of the point she was making, I really agree that there should be, whether it be by a footnote or in a sentence or two, kind of acknowledging that this issue isn't just one beginning there, and also it's one that is ongoing. There is a redetermination process. We did talk about that in the task force. A redetermination process that is happening in the community all the time and at intervals while they're in, skilled nursing facility environments also. So there's a lot going on here beyond just that interaction between the nursing home and the Medicaid application.
Cameron, just on that second paragraph that starts through our discussions, then we can capitalize the task force, or task force.
We can go through and do a search and replace for that too. Steve?
So I think we should also add in language and acknowledge that we gained guidance from the states that have already passed or worked on legislation in this area. New York, New Jersey, Ohio, Tennessee, Florida have all already worked on this, and we should be using them as guidelines. And I think that's a good recommendation as well for the legislature.
Yeah, one of the things that we had based this template on, Michael had found the report for the senior centers. And so that's kind of how we came up with the template. And as I was working on it and trying to do a summary of each of our meetings, at first I wasn't sure if that was necessary, or, that's where we kind of go into more detail about what we heard from each of the speakers. So I don't know if we want to move that to a different section, or if we want to leave it at the end, or if we want to just incorporate what we learned substantively in our executive summary rather than doing a meeting by meeting summary. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that. Because the meeting where Jerry Rothkopf came, it's we have it listed in here, but perhaps it would make more sense for us to include the pertinent information we got at meetings in the executive summary? I don't know.
I think we can, because some of that we had the legislation in our resources
Mhm.
section before we even got to the meetings. So maybe we can mention it up here and then include what we learned from the people from the other states in their particular meeting
Mhm.
summary.
Does anybody have any thoughts on that, the meeting by meeting summary at the end?
I don't know if that, I don't know if you can save that in a clipboard. I just don't know if that fits with that paragraph because we're talking about ombudsman stuff and we weren't looking at those states for ombudsman things. But, you know, I'm happy to be mindful about what other states are doing. I just want to find the right place for it. And we can just
Right.
keep that in mind.
I would agree. That's not the paragraph for it,
All right, Marie.
just the section.
If I could suggest, if we go back to the work plan, the task force work plan, and add it as a bullet there, I think it makes a lot of sense because it is one of the themes, one of the things we look at for the success and progress in other states.
Yeah, that might fit right there after community.
That's perfect. Thank you, Marie.
Thank you. Great. Matt Barrett.
Yeah, just briefly, I agree. We did look at those states. I think we looked at them insofar as that they ended up in the resource page. And I didn't read all of those, but I read a couple of ones, and I think I made reference to Carmine Perry's really good summary of Florida, one of the other states. But I'm actually not aware that those recommendations from those states or what was adopted, those states are actually included in any part of the report. I think we seem to go in a different direction. Those recommendations, there was a large focus on the unauthorized practice of law, and those recommendations wasn't there. That's not present in the recommendations here. And so while we did look at those, Attorney Rubin is correct about that, I don't see the connect, and I'm not objecting to mentioning them, but it's worth pointing out that that stuff isn't in the report that I could see.
Yeah, I think the point is that we did research other states and we didn't necessarily take what they did, but I think it's important that the legislature knows that we did research that and look at it in light of our recommendations.
I agree. No. I think we should rank mandated training out from the recommended. Laura, you made a comment in the chat, but maybe you can just help verbalize this also for Cameron's sake.
Sure.
Because I think we talk about that recommendation for PSC and it gets mentioned twice. It's a little bit there and that finally, and then it's also in the number 3, I think.
Okay.
On the next page.
So in this last paragraph, we talk about establishing a staffing ratio for protective services, social workers, so they aren't overwhelmed with cases. So they have a reasonable number of cases to manage at one time. And that's something that was recommended on a national level by the National Adult Protective Services Association. They did a study a few years back, and I think I sent Michael the report on that. They're just guidelines, they're best practices, but that's one of the recommendations in that report. And one of the things that we talked about that would support the need for a staffing ratio that we talked about was if we provide mandated reporting to or mandated training to mandated reporters, obviously the demand for PSC services is going to go up as the level of awareness goes up. So I think one follows the other. I think the education is actually the first piece that I think we all were in agreement with, is that there's a lot of education that needs to be done. So I think that should come first, that mandated reporters should have some sort of mandated training, and maybe we should, and I can certainly work on this, Michael, if you'd like, and Joan, if you'd like me to, that there should be mandated training for those individuals and flesh that out a little bit more as maybe a fourth recommendation. And then what would follow from that is the increased demand that we're going to see. It's, you know, it usually is something that happens, you know, and maybe I don't think Dorian was able to speak to this, but, you know, you have a new, the legislature adds a new mandated reporter to the list of mandated reporters, and all of a sudden, you know, it's new. So all those mandated reporters are kind of on alert, and they get an increase or a bump in the number of reports that they get. But if we're doing overall mandated reporting and training, you know, it's going to go up. Not to mention that the PSE audit report actually showed a significant increase in cases over the last 10 years and a marked decline in the number of social workers. So when you look at the graph that they provide, it's actually an X, where the numbers go up and the social workers go down. So it's pretty obvious that there's a need for more staffing there.
So the third recommendation kind of goes into both of those. So you're thinking to split it up into two?
Yeah.
So we'd have 4 key recommendations.
Yeah, I think they're separate from one another. But
Okay.
You know, and
yeah, and if you want, I mean, if you want to help with some of the language in 3, like that was kind of written based on the meeting that you and I had. But obviously, if you have some more specifics to put in there, then we'd welcome that.
okay, I can do that.
So if we take the task force recommends ensuring staffing for PSE on a ratio of 25-30, that would be recommendation number 4.
Yeah, I think that seems to follow the education piece.
Yeah. And then, you know, there's just a brief paragraph about that, just recognizing that if we do more training, we're going to have more cases. But perhaps you could help flesh that language out a little bit too, and reference the national study. I kind of just mentioned it briefly, but
Okay.
all the specifics and maybe the audit report too. Thank you.
Yeah, because I want to figure out how, like, Cameron can effectively make these changes now. And when I think we've now gone a little bit further than where we were. We were like, maybe we can go back up to primary recommendations 1. Just want to confirm with everyone that that first one is okay before we go to the 3rd and 4th. Maybe scroll up a little bit more. All right. Were we okay then with this last paragraph? Laura, would it be okay if this stays as it is?
Yeah, I can try to draft something to break those 2 concepts up.
Okay. All right. And then let's go to 1. And then who had their hand up first? I see 3 people. Marie?
Thank you. I have a comment, and I'm not sure what we can really do about it. But when we look at the first primary recommendation and we consider a checklist that asks questions like, I am married, I own real estate, I'm just a little worried about the number of individuals. When you look at individuals applying for the Connecticut Home Care Program and long-term services and supports through Medicaid, many of them are married, many of them own real estate, many of them have less than $5,000 in the bank. So if we were to share this questionnaire with them, which makes it sound as if they really must go seek legal advice prior to completing the application for Medicaid services, I just wonder if this isn't going to have an unintentional consequence of prolonging, delaying access to care. And I know how important it is for us to make sure that we're giving these clients every opportunity, should they have a disabled child, or look at the spousal assessment and making sure that they're maximizing funds that stay with the spouse. But I wonder if this isn't going to cause, if this is a checklist that anyone applying for the Connecticut Home Care Program is going to share with the client, it may cause some unintentional consequences, delays, and people going back to attorneys. And I know most attorneys would not take the last $10,000 that the individual has in the bank. It would probably send them back and say, no, I think you should let the access agency go forward with your application. But in many cases, we have clients coming to us where, their resources are being spent down at incredibly fast rates because they're paying for care. They may have that $10,000, $15,000, and we're initiating an application for the state-funded side, and very quickly, as assets are spent down, moving them over to Category 3, the Medicaid side. I don't want to get in the weeds with this, but I know our attorneys, our elder law attorneys, know what I'm talking about. And I want to make sure that we're careful here with how we use this for those clients.
I'm going to say something briefly, and then maybe Joan, you can respond if you want. I think when it comes to the checklist, it's something we're definitely interested in. I think this is kind of an example of a starting point of it. I have a feeling that the way that the legislature works, that if they wanted to explore that topic as because it's one of our primary recommendations, that they may similarly to us spin off a new group and say, we're going to make a work group that's going to develop this checklist, and it's going to go through all the nuance that you're asking about, Marie. I think Joan was trying to be thoughtful to kind of point to the direction, but I don't want to speak on your behalf, Joan. I want, if you want to respond to. But I have a feeling that that's how that might work if they wanted to pursue something like that. But Joan, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree that that's probably how it will play out. This is not meant to be the final form. And I understand what you're saying, and perhaps there's some sort of question that can address the finances. The problem I have with that is, if there is real estate and they're a married couple or there's a disabled child, there's still legal work that needs to be done to protect that, even if they only have, even if they're below the minimum threshold. So I think we just have to put some more thought into that so that people understand that there are some legal protections that they should put in place, even if there's no quote unquote spend down that needs to go. I mean, there's also potentially legal services so that if somebody doesn't have the assets or the income, they could get that assistance. But I think they still should be seeking an attorney. I understand what you're saying about delaying it, though. We certainly don't want to delay anybody. But this is also just a disclosure and a recommendation. Doesn't necessarily mean they have to do it. We're not forcing anybody to do this. We're just opening their eyes to the fact that they might have some legal rights that they should seek some protections for, which otherwise they might not realize. Because I think the biggest issue is that people think that their circumstances are very simple. I'm married, I have a house. They don't realize that that could cause complications. So I think that's what the checklist is really about, is to just enlighten them that they might have some legal rights that should be protected.
I see a lot of hands. Marie, is that okay?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. I want to say we'll go Anna, Steve, Matthew, Matt. Anna.
Sure. So the quick comment is, we should specify that we're talking about Medicaid application assisters. instead of just application assister. But I think the more complicated comment is, are we recommending this as a best practice? Are we recommended that this be part of training curriculums? Are we recommending that, the state require documentation of a checklist being completed before an application is submitted? So I think, if we can get a little bit more granular on who we expect to have ownership, I guess, over this process, and is there some kind of enforcement mechanism? But if we can make a decision around, do we think this is a nice to do, or are we recommending that this is, that this should be some kind of mandate? I think we just need to be a little more clear about what we're recommending.
Joan, do you want to respond to
Um, I think that it needs to be somehow mandated, and I think that's something that I don't know if it's our job to determine that as the task force, or if that's something that would happen through the legislative process. But my thought behind it was it would, as I wrote, be a prerequisite that anybody assisting or anybody filling out this application would complete this checklist first.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea, and I think I feel like we've landed on a really good compromise position from where some of our initial conversation as a task force started. I just think that if we say, we recommend a checklist without saying, who has ownership over it or who has oversight over the completion, that it would be too easy for nothing to come of it.
Right.
And then people would just assume, it's recommended as best practice, but without a clear ownership.
Mm-hmm.
In practical terms, it just never happens.
Yeah.
Okay.
Steve?
Well, first to that point, I do, maybe we should put in that we advise that it should be mandatory and leave that up to the legislature, but we advise that that's our view. Second, a couple of things I saw on this first primary recommendation, and maybe it should lead to a secondary one, is New York passed a bill. And one, I really liked parts of it where it talks of required at any admission agreement. Not only was there something like this quiz, but also notices advising people that it is complicated and they might want an attorney. And I'll send the exact language through email instead of reading it because I'll read it too slowly. But it might be good to add that in either here or as a secondary to the primary recommendation, requiring that in every nursing home application there be certain notices required to demonstrate certain things. I know we already do that now to a degree, but maybe a little stricter with the way they did it there. And the other point that we might want to do is in New Jersey, is taking from, another state we got some information from. They actually created through the Department of Division of Consumer Affairs, we'd call it the Department of Consumer Affairs, an application assistance consumer brief where they kind of go through some of these issues as well. So I think there's 3 different ways we can kind of try to tackle this with that brief and have that being published. The Department of Consumer Affairs and a recommendation that they create something that's a resource. Just, this isn't something that's going to be at every facility, but it's something that's available online if people are looking so they can understand it.
Thanks. I think Matthew's hand was next.
Yes,
Where'd Matthew go?
we got a Matthew and a Matt.
Yeah.
So actually going off of what's in the comments from both Lara and Matt Barrett, if things were to be placed into forms, and I think it is referenced within here, the DSS, long-term medical care and home services form, the W1 form might have some information. I'll just be frank, one of my probably the primary comment that I had to this draft was with respect to this checklist and what might be required of advisors, that might be referred to within the long-term care setting. And I think along what whether it was Anna or some other comment as far as that this might be a little bit intimidating and ultimately might have a detrimental impact or hesitancy of those who do fill out the application. And in my comment draft, just as a suggestion, I actually took out the entire checklist and modified that recommendation to a statement along what Stephen had said, is that that there are complex issues, and prior to submitting the application, you may want to seek the services of an elder law attorney, as opposed to yes, no, yes, no, yes, no. And I'll again be frank, particularly the phrase that may result in a significant financial loss to you, I thought was a bit potentially intimidating to those who might ultimately freeze in filing the application because perhaps they didn't want to engage in those services or just didn't feel comfortable doing so for whatever reason. So that was one of my overall comments for this section. And I think later on in the additional recommendations, I think it's one thing to say that situations may be more complex than they appear. The use of an elder law attorney certainly may be advisable in what is to everyone a very complex area of law and rules. But by going through this type of what is effectively a checklist and then almost a hard stop potential provision of you should seek an elder law attorney, or if you don't, you're at risk of significant financial loss, and putting that into a state form, I'm not so sure, at least personally, that I'm willing to go that far in a recommendation.
And my only comment to that is I'm just afraid if we just use that general language of the application itself and planning or applying for Medicaid is complex. Again, people who feel that their situation is not complex are just going to overlook it. And that's where I think the checklist is important, because it actually opens people's eyes to the fact that even though they might have what they think is a simple situation, they might have some need for planning, because it could result in significant financial loss if they don't take the proper action with respect to their house, or if their disabled child is living with them and they don't know that they can, transfer assets to them to care for them for the rest of their lives. So I think just a generic disclosure like that is not really going to have any effect. Matt, you had your hand up?
Yeah, and I don't know if this is what I've and I put some things in the chat just to facilitate my making this comment. And I don't know that my suggestion, I think it may actually be construed as a compromise permission near to what Attorney Rubin had just suggested. But let me, if I could just briefly say, why did I start with saying to the extent permitted by federal law? And it's this, the language of significant final loss. If the intent of the authors, and by the way, putting fear into people's heads and worry is actually quite a motivator. And so if the intent was to sort of put a big stop sign emoji, before anybody started a Medicaid application, or some sort of caveat emptor, buyer beware, then I think that language is really powerful and actually accomplishes that. The question is does it overreach, number one? And number two, could it possibly be in conflict with some of the federal rules that we've been talking about. And that's that, and this is all in the Code of Federal Regulations. The agency must provide assistance, the agency being DSS, to any individual seeking help with the application. So when DSS is helping with the application, this rule, this significant financial rules would presumably apply to them. But it goes on, the agency must also allow individuals of the applicant or beneficiary's choice to assist in the application process or during a renewal of eligibility. This is a guarantee. You want to call it a patient right, because we have talked about the Bill of Rights. These would be rights. And so the question of does that language, significant final loss, is it so intimidating or dramatic that it undermines, these rights that are present elsewhere? And again, I'm not suggesting that's the intent, but sometimes our laws, even though on their face, or our recommendations on their face, don't immediately create this impact, but in practice, and again, going to the issue of the delays and a huge flow of persons, many of them appropriately seeking the attorney, legal expertise. And it's just a question of, is that flies in the face of that? That's why I said I'd be more comfortable assigning my approval of this if we held out the idea that there may be a legal problem here with that checklist and its language, being in violation of the law. And so I stated it in a way where it doesn't say it is or it isn't. It just says to the extent permitted by federal law, and then then the recommendation flows. And that in the meantime, I would hope DSS, maybe in consultation with the Attorney General's office, would investigate that question for the task force and maybe for the aging committee. That was my first comment. The second comment is Medicaid assister and advisor is used interchangeably here, is not well defined. And I was just wanted to immediately sort of suggest that it should be broadly defined, not just to non-attorneys providing application assistance. I think we heard from good comments from Attorney Linnea Levine, on this issue of elder law attorneys have a particular expertise. Many of them have certifications and specialized training, even though they're not really allowed to call themselves Medicaid specialists. They stand above any other attorneys doing this. And so we need to, when we're talking about referring or saying you should seek the advice, I think we're saying you should seek the advice of one of those attorneys. And by the way, and the mechanism for how consumers find them, there was some talk about, an inventory or some sort of list of who they are. That's really not addressed here, but probably should be. But this idea that this should be more broadly to include attorneys who do not possess the kind of legal experience and expertise that so clearly, let's take Joan Wilson, for example. So clearly she possesses, and that we heard from Attorney Lang and Attorney Linnea and others, that they possess. And so those protections have to be provided there as well. And for that matter, for any other private entity that is providing application assistance of the sort that we have been talking about. And I hate to say this really directly, and the Department of Social Services. Let's face it, the lion's share of the interface between applicants on this subject is not through the elder law bar or through any Medicaid planning agency. It's directly with DSS. And so they have to be subject to this kind of policy if that's what we're going to have. And so, but I wanted to get to this issue because I think it's an important one. And I think if Joan is the author of the checklist, I think it's somewhat brilliant. She trying to get to the idea of, hey, what are the complicated issues that would trigger, you wanting to seek and potentially benefiting considerably from the advice of Joan and Attorney Lang and others. And so I try to state it in a way that, and I put it in the chat without being so scary about it, but also mentioning, they had expertise in the application process itself and the permitted practices under state and federal law that had, included provisions or safeguards for the care of a disabled child, and then we just go on with lists. And so I don't know. I feel like what I recommended is a compromise permission. I don't know if the agency would agree with that, but that's my explanation of what I put into the chat and the reasons for doing so.
Okay, maybe just a moment, Michelle. So as far as to the extent permitted by federal law, I think that's okay to put in. Matt, where is that a specific line? Where should we put that line? We should have it there at least once somewhere.
I think
Okay.
right at the beginning. Right at the beginning.
So scroll up a little, Cameron.
Yeah, and you should know, that's not a term of art I invented. That's one we see in the Connecticut general statutes.
It should be within the paragraph or in this bolded. Where should it go, Matt?
I think two places. I think this sentence right before primary recommendation, I think it could be included in there, and it also could be included in the body of recommendation number 1. And forgive me, I didn't mark where it needed to go, but certainly up front, because you're signaling right now that. And by the way, this is only if you agree that there's a question of whether or not this might so undermine the federal right that it could be construed as in violation of it.
There is a reference to the fact that the federal law allows anybody to complete the application in the body of the recommendation.
There is.
Yeah,
but
the second sentence.
I wanted to say
No
it for the
federal
record.
law.
I don't think it was enough.
There it is.
I didn't think it was enough.
I mean, we could change it so it says, take out the word although, and just start with federal law allows anybody to complete an application, period, or a semicolon. Yet the planning and preparation requires legal. Because that's really the distinction. And that's the distinction that I think a lot of people don't understand.
Okay.
Maybe just put the word however or something before the word the. Right there.
I think that's good, but it doesn't address the issue. And I'm not suggesting that you're in agreement with me, but it doesn't address the issue of that the actual language of the notice or advisory could have an impact that would violate the federal provision. And that's why I suggested to the extent permitted by federal law, because we don't want to recommend something that that could be a violation there. I don't think that's anybody's intent. So it's kind of safeguarding language, but not really undermining the intent. Of course, that recommendation is very much linked to my recommendation that we restate really completely what would the checklist approach with an alternative recommendation, which I put in the chat, and broadening the definition of who are we talking about here along the lines that I believe this task force contemplated.
Michelle? Do you have your hand up?
Sure. I think that the checklist is a fantastic idea. I do have clients in the community I work with that have really benefited from a pool trust, and I've seen the advantages that it can do. And I think as sisters in the community, we're now not always aware of all of this that we can do for our clients. So I think the checklist is very important. I would love to see something happen. But, Marie just made a great comment in the chat. Our clients are going to come to us when they see this and be very confused and concerned and overwhelmed. And I think the assisters in the community, not the paid ones, case managers, social workers, anyone, even family, need the training that can help and assist with this. I think they take a lot of responsibility when filling out these applications. So I think that needs to be done. And Stephen mentioned something about New Jersey, and I think New Jersey had put together a great booklet with their long-term care application that talked all about pool trust and really broke it down in an easy way for people to understand. And that would be ideal to have attached to this application or have the link up on the website when you download this application. And I think, like Laura said, with protective services, once you have more people trained, more cases will come in. And I think the checklist like this will put more strain on the helpers assisting in the community. So there does need to be training and recommendations for them, some type of support.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest takeaway that I got from all of the speakers and everything we talked about is we need a couple of different fixes across the system, just because people seek information and advice from all different places. I definitely think the education of the professionals is going to be key. But this also can help to continue to educate the professionals and also anybody who picks up an application on their own. I mean, it's important for people to understand that they might have some legal rights. Matthew?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have to, I guess, come to a conclusion or consensus today, but I do want to, again, echo some of Matt Barrett's concerns. I would just be concerned, and again, this is probably my primary point and comment on this draft and some of the other recommendations that follow, is that anyone, of course, anyone who completes this application has a multitude of legal rights, and there are nuances to eligibility determinations and considerations that may be of financial benefit or detriment to the applicant. My concern in any sort of recommendation that comes out of the task force that would request that the legislature mandate certain language within either within the application itself, which might frankly not be the appropriate place, but maybe in the preamble, or there's a cover notice that would go to the application. But there does need to be careful consideration that the signal is not that if you do not seek the services of an elder law attorney, frankly, you shouldn't proceed. And I know that's not what it says, but that's what the takeaway might be for a large subset of individuals, because anyone can proceed with the application without seeking the advice of an attorney, and can obtain services through DSS and others who do not need to be attorneys in completing the application itself. Considerations of all the various trust agreements and other that go into one's financial circumstances is separate than completing the application. And I'm just concerned that a recommendation of the task force might, not intentionally, but add as a barrier to those seeking to apply for Medicaid or long-term services and support.
And perhaps we can add the sentence to that effect, and be very clear that people don't have to take this. They can fill out the application. They can have somebody else fill it out. It's not a requirement to filling it out. It's just a notice that we want to disclose that they have these rights. Did you have language, or you just struck it out completely from your draft, Matthew?
So I'll tell you I did strike it out, but I did replace it with a suggestion of please something along the lines of the task force suggests at a minimum that the following information be highlighted for anyone completing the Department of Social Services application for long-term medical care or home care services, or when an organization or facility informs the consumer to available services offered by non-attorney Medicaid assisters. And then what I had put in was, please know that you have legal rights that can protect you and your finances, period. For example, if you have a spouse, own real estate, have a child who is disabled, or if someone has been living with and caring for you in the last 2 years and you are seeking long-term medical care or home care services, you may wish to consult with an elder law attorney, capital, prior to completing the attached application. And that's,
Okay, so that's going to be in the draft that you're sending us?
yes.
Okay, so we can look at that. It's almost 11:30, so we probably, I don't know if anybody else has any comments on recommendation 1, but we might want to move on to number 2.
I agree. And I'm going to put Cameron, I'm going to put you on the spot real quick. So because we have only a little bit of time left, I do want to try to hustle through and get through as much of this as possible. There might be the possibility that it might be permissible for us to reconvene again on like Monday. And over the weekend, make a lot more changes, maybe have some emailing back and forth or some email voting or whatever. The main idea has to be that we have to turn this in by Tuesday, the latest, because that will make it correctly transmitted to the legislature. And this dialogue is really, it's wonderful. It shows how much work we've all put into this and how much we all care. I just I want to be able to get through everything, and I'm sorry that we're a little bit in a time crunch here. So Cameron, what do you think? Is that, well, first of all, I'm going to ask the members what their feelings are about that. If maybe we put together something like a 10 a.m. on Monday, one more Zoom call for the people who are available to attend. Maybe we'll make some updated changes, Joan and Cameron and I in the meantime. People can also send in their recommendations, other changes too over the weekend too, and we can try to like put it all together based on whatever we don't get to today. So can I just get a thumbs up does that sound like okay for people? Okay, good. All right, let's move on to number 2. This one is pretty succinct. Does anyone have any comments on number 2? And hello, Senator Miller. Thank you for joining us.
Sorry, I'm trying to get my video on. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us. We're just working our way through this document, but we're pleased you're here with us.
Anna, did you have a comment?
I did, yeah, and this goes back to what I had mentioned earlier, and hi, Senator Miller, that for this recommendation in particular, I'd like to remove the word senior, because I don't think it's the intent that we would have an expanded ombudsman program that would only serve the 60 or 65 plus population, but that it would be available to anyone who receives LTSS in the community.
Say resident instead of senior?
I would say to serve LTSS recipients or individuals who receive home and community-based services. Something that defines the population based on this service received instead of based on age.
Recipient. Is that okay?
I would take out the to serve LTSS recipients who live in the community. And I'm very open to suggestions on how to wordsmith this, but that was important to me to remove senior from that recommendation.
I liked what you said before, where you said to serve individuals who receive home and community-based services. Or maybe we could leave it as LTSS recipients who receive home and community-based services.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Thank you, Cameron. You're doing great.
Yeah, I mean, I think this, and again, this is really picky. I think this particular phrasing could exclude people who are part of the state-funded portion of the home care program for elders. Not sure.
Recipients and
individuals.
others? Can we say LTSS recipient and others?
And yeah, I think that's I think that's
How about
broad
that?
enough. Yeah, thank you.
Anyone else? How about the paragraph itself? Marie?
I'm not sure if there's a place for this in the recommendation, but if we are creating this community-based ombudsman, which I think we all agree is an important step, we have to give them teeth as it relates to authority over the provider network that's providing long-term care services and supports, in-home supports, whether it be a companion, a homemaker, a personal care attendant. Because one of the things that has happened in the Connecticut Home Care Program in 2013, a change was made so that the provider network is no longer under contract to the access agencies. They're under a contract to the department themselves. And in some cases, because of the stress on the department, there's not a lot of oversight of these long-term care providers, and you end up with kind of a wild west of providers. Some providers with very high quality standards and a lot of support and supervision of the individuals who are in the actual client homes, and others not so much at all. So yes, I completely agree with the recommendation that there needs to be additional supports, but we have to make sure that the ombudsman will have the authority to punish when necessary and instruct when appropriate those long-term care providers that are enrolled in Connecticut's medical assistance program.
So that reminds me of the discussion we had, I think, between the ombudsman and Matthew, talking about the carrot and the stick and having those types of authorities. Marie, do you have a suggested line or something you want to add to the paragraph, or how should we proceed?
I would be happy to work on that. I do not have one at the ready, but I will spend some time thinking about that and sending it into Cameron.
Okay, that would be good. Again, I want to be mindful to try to hunker through as much of this as possible right now, so that whatever is remaining that we can kind of sort through by email or however, and continue with this. Is there anything else outstanding on this number 2 from any of our members? Senator Miller, would you like? Yes.
Hi, I'm sorry to interrupt. I want to just get on to say thank you. I have another meeting that I have to go to, but just to say thank you to the task force for taking this on. I know that a lot of you have devoted your time and your energy towards this issue, and I really do appreciate it. We do have a placeholder waiting for your report for you to publish your report. So we're excited to see what kind of work has come out, over the last couple of days, I guess months. It's been over the last few months, but we really do appreciate it because we know that we're all busy. but this issue was important enough to all of you that you were willing to, dedicate and commit yourself to the issue. So thank you again. I'm sorry I couldn't get on earlier to thank you, but I appreciate it. And I think I could speak for my co-chair, Representative Garibay, to say thank you as well.
Well, thank you very much, Senator. We appreciate your interest, your championship and leadership on these issues. And it's very pleasing for all of us to know that all of this hard work is going to be so warmly received by your committee. And we're very excited to see the outcome of this work and how the legislature will take these recommendations. So thank you so much for joining us. We know you're very busy, but we definitely are grateful for your participation today.
Thank you,
thank
and
you
everyone
very
have a
much.
nice weekend. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much.
Oh, no, thank you. It's really heartfelt. It's a heartfelt thank you. So appreciate it. And thank you for taking care of our population, the aging population, the seasoned population, the older population. But thank you, because they rely on us. And I just feel that we have a responsibility to take care of them because we stand on their shoulders. So again, thank you so much. And I'm sorry I have to.
Thank you so much. How motivating, guys. Let's do this. Let's finish this up. All right, should we move to number 3? So I think
And I'll be 3 and 4.
Right. So this might be also complicated. Maybe Laura and Joan, I don't know, should we try to split this, or should maybe we can work on this one offline and come back together to revisit it, and then let's just finish off the rest of it so we can know that the rest of the report is it's okay or not.
Well, does anybody Laura mentioned splitting it into 2. Does anybody have any substantive concerns about it, or that they want to bring up now before we flush it out? I don't see any hands. Got through that one quickly.
Yeah, so let's scroll down to additional recommendations. And this one might be where perhaps some of our members have some extra things they want to include. But let's begin with if there's any updates or changes to what we have so far. Anyone?
Steve?
So in the area where it talks about the required disclosures in writing about affiliations and things, I would also add any disclosures required about payments for services. So if someone is referring to somebody else, are they getting a kickback essentially for making that referral to any entity? I think that should be a required disclosure notice.
Where would that go, Steve? Which one?
I would put it where the disclosure in writing to a Medicaid applicant, so right where Cameron's mousing, I would put it in there because it talks about connections to the nursing home. I'd also add to any staff to the nursing home. Do they employ the staff outside of hours? Do they provide any funding directly to the staff? Is there any fee for service or fee for play essentially going back?
You might have to help us wordsmith this one for Cameron.
I can work on some language afterwards.
Okay, let's just make a note and flag that one so we can make it nicer and suitable for you. Matt Barrett.
Thank you, Michael. Really just going along the lines of my previous recommendation regarding defining the Medicaid advisor or assister broadly along the lines I put in the chat. Would also recommend that be clear in this section. And again, restating the language that I had previously recommended regarding the, that these advisories have to apply more broadly to that broad group, but they should be stated in a way that isn't so alarming as to perhaps might run afoul of the federal law or discourage people from going through with the application process. And so really the same comments apply in the bullet beginning that begins with a Medicaid advisor, both those bullets. And also the bullet above that, a Medicaid applicant Bill of Rights. My only suggestion there is that if there's, you should, I had made reference in one of our previous meetings to the patient's Bill of Rights that is on point in terms of certain rights related to, the application assistance. And anything that we add shouldn't be in a new Bill of Rights. It probably will more properly be amended to that section of the law.
So should we, for that one, it says a Medicaid applicant's Bill of Rights, because I remember that was one of the recommendations from one of the Connecticut Elder Bar attorneys. Real quick, Matt, how should we phrase that so we can update this bullet?
As a recommendation, maybe simply that the task force recommends consideration that the Medicaid app, the nursing home residents Bill of Rights be amended as appropriate to include any new rights created as recommended by the task force. In other words, it's just I think that's where everyone would look for an application, an applicant's rights or protections. They would look to this section rather than a separate section. It's no less the law if it's someplace else, but that's really my only recommendation there. It's if there was a body of law dealing with some subject and you were creating adding on to it, you'd probably put it in that body of law. That's really all I'm suggesting there.
Do you see what Cameron just did? Does that look okay to you? See it's highlighted right there?
Before you delete that, my only concern with that is it going to apply for people who are in the community? If it's in the nursing home
Well, that's a good
Bill
point.
of Rights?
I think that's an excellent point. No, that, well, did the ombudsman opine on that when she was before us? I mean, I guess no. I guess the answer is no, because she does have authorities outside of nursing homes in other settings. But I guess this whole point of so much what we've talked about is her authorities don't extend into the community. So you're certainly correct about that. If the intent is to be more broad about that, then you should put it separately and strike everything I just said.
Okay, and maybe also I can go back to the testimony just to be clear about what should be included in that applicant's Bill of Rights from that discussion. I remember I wanted to keep that concept, but maybe we can also look to expand on it a little bit so it's clear what we mean based on the recommendation of the attorney. Steve, is your hand up?
No, I think we hit that issue already.
Okay, all right, I'm sorry, I see your hand up. Yep. Anyone else? It's 11:43. Marie Ellen.
Very quickly, I just wanted to say that for community-based long-term services and supports, there is a document, a rights and responsibilities document that is signed and we go over it with any client making an application for the Connecticut Home Care Program. So we may be able to join forces with Matt Barrett's recommendation.
Okay, does anyone else have any other comments about this page, bottom page 6, before we go to 7? Okay, seeing none. Cameron, maybe scroll to the next page. Okay.
Michael, I think I have one recommendation having to do with that first bullet. I know this was sort of a concept that we had talked about is, who does the mandated training for the mandated reporters, and certainly the AAAs are in that in a good position to do that because they have those local contacts and they're distributed throughout the state. There's 5 different regional area agencies on aging, but I think it needs to be acknowledged that there needs to be some funding behind that, both for if the coalition were to develop that training with the AAAs and protective services, there has to be some sort of funding for that because there's just not, the administrative abilities of either the coalition or the AAAs to do that currently. So there needs to be some sort of support for that administratively.
Okay, so
I don't know if there can be an added recommendation that be funded in some way. I mean, it's a good recommendation, but how does that get done in reality? The first one on the top of the next page, I think.
Is it this one? Active recruitment, or I'm sorry, I just want to be clear for Cameron.
It's on the top of page 7. I thought we were on the next page. I'm sorry.
I think stuff got pushed down.
Oh, okay. It says have the agencies on aging present. Yeah, right there.
So should we add to that one? The task force recommends a suitable funding to ensure this, or something like that. What do you think?
I think Murray would agree with me on that.
Absolutely, Lara.
And Jackie, I see something in here about seek the advice in chief. Did we fix that? Is that something? It's all set? Okay, okay. Anything else? I have a new one. I think everyone's going to love it. It says, have the Senior Fraud Task Force continue its work with a longer time frame to gather evidence and report out. What do we say? Thumbs up? Is that something we want to say?
Yes.
Judge Beverly recommended it. So, all right. So let's have the Senior Fraud Task Force continue its work with a longer time frame to gather evidence and report out. Just for laughs, we'll throw it in.
And the first meeting shall
And funding.
convene. And the first meeting shall convene no earlier than 3 weeks after the end of the public health emergency.
When is that? Did you get that in there?
Can you please repeat the line?
Yes, sorry. Have the Senior Fraud Task Force continue its work with a longer time frame to gather evidence and report out. And if they accept this one, I apologize. Does anyone have any extra additional recommendations, bullet points that they wanted to add from, reviewing this from last night or that's occurred to them since this morning? I think there might still be time to add a few of it. I just want to be mindful that it's 11:49. I want to end our meeting on time today. I think there's still going to be some work on primary recommendation number 1 and number 3 that we'll continue to work on. The various people, Steve, you're gonna help us fix some language on one of those things. And then when we send stuff, let's send it to everyone. And then that way we can see if maybe we can just take care of voting on this thing by email or something by the end, just so that we can get it submitted on time. And if there's folks who have an objection, we can, write dissent or something at the end and include it, or however we want to think about it. Matt Barrett.
Thank you, Michael, and thanks so much for all of your consideration. I just wanted, so many of my comments, and this is perfectly fine, as I was making, didn't end up in the draft that we were sort of working on now. But I didn't want to construe that to mean that the additional comments I may send in won't get the task force's additional consideration.
No, we want everyone's
they're gonna-
consideration of everyone's concepts for sure.
And I don't envision sending anything in really beyond what I've expressed at the meeting. And so thank you so much for that.
No, thank you. And again, I'm, very mindful of the time crunch. Joan and I, we have the same goal of like having the most collaborative and inclusive document we possibly can that covers everyone's interest and is representative of the work that we've done. These types of things are tricky when we deal with deadlines, but I'm feeling good about it. And how nice was it we got Senator Miller to come and endorse our work here. So I think this is going to be very well received. And I definitely want to be mindful of all of our members' input and feedback and any extra additions they may want to add. So
everybody who has changes can email that to Cameron, and then he can share with me and Michael, and we'll try to compile as much as we can. We're going to be busy this weekend.
Yeah. And what we'll do is Cameron and I and Joan will talk about seeing maybe if we can put together a last minute, should be brief, maybe Monday Zoom call if we can. Otherwise, maybe we'll try to do it by email. We'll see. But after we compile all the different, so in other words, if everyone can, right now it's Thursday, I don't know, if by Saturday afternoon, everyone can try to get to us those changes so that we can have that time Saturday afternoon, Sunday to compile it, make a big master document, send it out to everyone. And then we'll maybe just ask, like, is this okay? Is there an objection, right? Or are you in favor of it, whatever? And then that will help us to kind of zero in, and then we can maybe just have the brief meeting. And for folks who can't attend, they can email in their thoughts about it, or if they want to attend, they can, and then we can just maybe close it up at that point and finalize it, and then make sure that we transmit it on time. Any other comments? It's 11:53.
Can't believe we finished early.
All right. Well, big shout out to Cameron today for his driving the show. We super appreciate your work and helping to make these additional changes. I'm very excited about this, and this feels good. So, I'm going to open the floor one last time. Anyone have any other last comments? And I'm going to let Joan close this out.
Thank you, everybody. I really, really appreciate all the time everybody put in and the comments. I think we are getting there. We're gonna get to a really good report that takes into account everybody's where everybody's coming from. And I think this group has been a really good, diverse section of all the different areas that help the older adults, not the seniors. So I appreciate everybody's work and comments, and I'm looking forward to getting this completed. I don't know about that last recommendation of continuing on.
We can, you all tell us in the email, we can pull it out. It still hasn't been finalized yet. All right. I only wanted to honor what we heard in previously from other speakers. So thank you. And okay, so everyone have a great rest of the day. Thank you all for your time and your service on the Senior Fraud Task Force.